So with that, I'd like to ask you to put your hands together and welcome Ric Lewis, our Senior Vice President, General Manager.
Thank you all for being here. It certainly is the happiest place on earth. I'm doing really well today because I woke up this morning and kind of was groggy, stayed up late doing a little bit of email, had a bunch of work things to do, and thought I just need some breakfast. I need to get downstairs. So I went down to the first cafe that I thought I could go into. They said we have buffet breakfast. I thought that was great. Well, I didn't realize it, but I joined a Disney character breakfast. So I have spent the morning with Pluto, Chip and Dale, and the gang. And you know, it's interesting. You ought to do that for an experience. Just go show up in a full suit and tie with a business briefcase at a character breakfast, and then watch the characters come up to you and try to kind of figure out, how do I deal with this guy? Do I shake his hand? Do I ignore him like he's not there? And so anyway, the selfie with Pluto was way worth it, I can tell you that. So actually, I didn't do that, but I'm regretting it at this point. I wish I would have done that. So anyway, welcome, and like the intro said there, I'm leading something called Software Defined in Cloud for Hewlett Packard Enterprise. And if you watched closely on the little thing that had my name on it before that, it said Converged Data Center, and you'd say, well, does he have a different title, or what is exactly going on here? And the answer to that is my job's changing right now. So I have been leading the Converged Data Center Infrastructure Group for Hewlett Packard Enterprise for a couple of years now. The thing that does our converged systems offering, our hyperconverged, our synergy composable offerings, our blade systems, kind of the things that are at the intersection of hardware and software. And you're probably seeing some pretty big announcements from Hewlett Packard Enterprise right now around the whole area of what are we doing with software and some of that. And in fact, we changed the direction of a little bit of this presentation based on that, because we've had big announcements on doing some spin merge of some of our software assets and things like that. And I'm here to tell you that the software that we're doing inside Hewlett Packard Enterprise is still strong and growing. We're spin merging out the specific areas of application software, things like Vertica and Autonomy and those kind of things, but the things focused on hybrid IT and making that journey simple for our customers, we're still doing all of that, and that's all in my group. So it's a really fun thing. I like to joke with my peers that I have the most fun job at Hewlett Packard Enterprise, but there's some good things going on there. So that's what I do. Without further ado, let's kind of dive in. And Dan did a good job of introducing this notion of disruption. And there really is disruption going on all around us. To let you get to know me a little bit better, which I think is generally a good thing, and I lead teams of thousands of engineers, and I find that they just get a lot more done if they feel like that guy that they are working for, they know him, and they get a little bit about him. Uber has transformed the industry. I'm a guy that's a pretty early adopter of technology. I have no problem with that, but I've been slow to pile on the Uber train. And it's because I'm based in Fort Collins, Colorado. I have, cars, and we drive everywhere, and for a while there weren't a whole lot of people doing Uber in a smaller place like that. But part of it is just where I grew up. You just drove everywhere. I'm not afraid to drive a 5-hour drive. That's nothing to me. When I go to Europe, they look at me like I'm crazy because I'll drive across multiple countries and they think, where are you going? So story, I'm up at Microsoft and we're working out our Azure partnership, and I'm at the corporate headquarters, and my kids have been telling, Dad, you need to use Uber, quit renting cars, all this. And finally my assistant at work is saying, I can send a black car over there and pick you up, but it's really expensive. Just use Uber. I said, fine. I'm the software guy. I ought to be able to use Uber or whatever. So I dial onto my phone, and we finished this big meeting. I'm standing out there again in my suit and tie on the corner, and it says, Kenny in his blue Toyota Corolla is going to come pick me up. Great. Kenny, here he comes. I can see him. I'm tracking him, all that. It says Kenny's 2 minutes out. I'm talking to a guy that's there at the roundabout there in Redmond, Washington, and up pulls the bluish Corolla, and I open the back door and I hop in and I said, hey Kenny, can you get me to SeaTac? I got to catch a flight. And the guy turns around and he goes, I'm not Kenny, and what are you doing in my car? And so I hopped out really quickly and awkwardly, immediately to be followed by a silverish blue Toyota Camry. It turns out I read wrong on the Uber thing. And I was really careful that time. I said, "Are you Kenny?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, "Let's get to SeaTac. I'm a little late." So anyway, disruption. I've been disrupted, and I'm slow to get there. But not just Uber and Lyft, but today, you don't have to buy a GE locomotive. They sell it as a service. You need to pull a load, they'll sell it as a service. It's covered with sensors. They need to keep that thing up and running. You don't pay for the actual train, you pay for the usage of that train. Peer-to-peer lending is another picture that we have on here. Transactions without banks. There's a whole industry that's being disrupted by peer-to-peer lending going on. It's at $11 billion today and growing at 200%. Now that's a tiny fraction of the overall business, but you can see it happening. Driverless cars. Dan mentioned this earlier. It's estimated that 66% of the traffic in London will be removed from the streets by having driverless cars that are servicing the population in London in not that many years. Blockchain networks, this is about payments, the third-party payments industry. Those of you who've done big transactions, there's a clearinghouse behind the scenes it takes to establish a trusted network to be able to establish that trust and have a third party involved in payments. Blockchain eliminates that middleman, and you can do large financial transactions through a trusted network in 10 minutes. So all of these things are being disrupted, and even big ones that you know. You and I think of Mercedes-Benz as an automobile manufacturer, and they don't think of themselves as an automobile manufacturer anymore, right? And that was kind of the space that they were thought of as the preeminent leader. They will tell you, and in fact their quote here from the head of it all says, "We're transitioning from car manufacturer to a networked mobility provider." So some of the things around network mobility, certainly there's luxury car service, which means they'll come pick you up, take you where you want to go in a Mercedes and charge you for that. That's fine, that's pretty normal, but it also has to do with the cars themselves. If you come up on a blind corner, you don't know what's around that corner, but the last car that went around that corner knows exactly what's around that corner. So if that car can talk to your car and say, "I know what's around that corner," then imagine the information and the potential that that networked mobility device has to revolutionize your driving. So it's happening everywhere. I mean, I won't beat it too much here, but it's disrupting a whole bunch of industries. There's obvious ones like the sale of books and how you get your magazines and newspapers, and the fact that most of you don't really ever use a travel agent anymore. You just get on your phone and dial up different applications, TripAdvisor, what have you. The ones that are in the middle of it are ones that we're working with closely every day: healthcare software providers, retail banking, transportation, even farming. John Deere now sells crop yield as a service, CYAS, I guess, I don't know what that is, with sensors monitoring the yields of your fields, and the tractor itself is just a component of that service. They sell you the productivity instead, not the tractor. So, you know, farming as a service, I guess, is what you'd call that. And there are things yet to be transformed that you can already see the early things. Dan mentioned insurance, manufacturing, utilities, teaching. I know a small startup in the state that I grew up in Idaho, that's completely transforming education as we know it by providing individualized student personalized learning where you track each student and their test scores and how they're doing and notes from their teacher and subjects that they're struggling with, and you provide 360 feedback from a parent, the student themselves, and actually the school to work together for very specific tailored learning to that student, rather than kind of blob learning for 30 students that are in a classroom, and you can track them over years and see how they're doing. Those kind of things are revolutionizing infrastructure, and they all have to do with IT at the center of it. So you're seeing that. What does that mean? What does it mean to the IT industry, the place where we all play? And, you know, I think it means that we need a big change in the underlying infrastructure. So when Henry Ford kind of went after the the Model T and developed the cars and things. The car is an important thing, but actually the assembly line was the super important thing because he industrialized the whole manufacture of automobiles. And if you think about it, we need to do a similar thing in IT. We need to industrialize this digital transformation because the big players there need a way to be able to repeatedly innovate and change and explore and fail quickly. You know, all the research around agile software methods that my teams are using and are taking over the industry, I don't think it's just going to be agile software development. I think it's going to be agile business development, things where you try prototypes, you get them out in the market as fast as you can, you fail as quick as possible and make changes and adapt. And if you're going to be able to do that, at the same time that IT is going from the background, which is, in the back office trying to keep things up and running and trying to stay out of the limelight for many businesses in the traditional space, and putting IT in the forefront where it actually is driving the revolution, is changing the business model. It's becoming how companies have IP around delivering profitable products to their customers and how they capture that revenue and how they capture the profitability. If you're going to do that, you have to have an underlying infrastructure that will enable that. And so it can't be, I've got this new project, I need to fill out a bunch of paperwork. A server farm will show up in 6 months to 2 years, sometime after that, once I get all the approvals. Then I'll paste some software on it that's going to be dedicated to that specific application for a long time, and it'll be in a corner of my data center, and I'll have to manage that. And then the next request will come in, and I'll plop down this whole new set of infrastructure. Doesn't happen, can't work for where things are going with all that disruption. Otherwise, all of those companies, all those people in those industries that I just showed are dinosaurs, and they will be disrupted by other things. So some people say, even some analysts were early to say, well, the answer to that is the public cloud. Hold your horses on that just a little bit. Certainly public cloud is growing, but what you're finding in these enterprises, and some of the ones that I mentioned earlier in my specific examples, public cloud is growing almost 20% rate CAGR. But private cloud is growing almost as quickly, 16.8%. Why is that? Why would private cloud be growing? And you can look at specific examples. If there was one spot in infrastructure, the thing I know really well, that should have been completely disrupted, it would be SMB. Many of you service SMB kind of customers, or you are SMB kind of customers, and early word on that would be, that's all going to go to the public cloud. It has to go to the public cloud because they don't have IT shops, they don't want a data center, they just want some people writing applications, and you can put that all in the public cloud. But hold your horses on that. What's the fastest growing segment of infrastructure today, the type of infrastructure? It turns out it's hyperconverged today. We'll talk about that in a minute. And where is hyperconverged experiencing the most growth? Small and medium business applications. So, if it really was all going to run straight to public cloud, that segment would not be growing as quick as it is. So why is that? Well, at least one place, Wikibon did a study here around what's the break-even time for public cloud versus hybrid cloud. And really what they found is enterprises that take a hybrid cloud approach using existing workflows, so taking that evolutionary approach instead of simply pushing everything to public clouds, have a faster break-even time, and they reduce the risk of that transition. So, looking at it, 3x more value with a hybrid cloud solution at 1/5 the break-even time from 25 months down to 5 months. Now, this analysis is, it doesn't mean to say, and I don't mean to be the person to say, public cloud isn't going to grow. Public cloud, of course, is going to grow. It's a great option for a lot of different workloads, but it's not the only answer. And what we're finding for our enterprise customers, whether they be the traditional ones today or the new emerging ones tomorrow, hybrid IT is where the action is at. And so you see Hewlett Packard Enterprise reorienting its strategy around making hybrid IT the bullseye, and that's what a lot of these changes have to do with. So if hybrid IT is the answer, well, let's just get out there and implement it. It ought to be easy. And so I'm going to show you a simple diagram of how you go implement hybrid IT on a customer site. And we'll take the next 3.5 hours and I'll explain it to you, and then we'll go install it, and it'll take 6 to 12 months, maybe, if we're lucky, and we'll get it all working, and everything will be great. So this is the problem statement for a software-defined and cloud infrastructure team. That's what my team does, is it can't be this way for hybrid IT. One great thing that the public cloud has done is shown that what customers really care about is a simple experience. What they really care about is not having to deal with a whole bunch of baggage of infrastructure and having to deal with firmware updates and all that other kind of stuff. And they want easily accessible services. So what you want to do if you're going to deliver hybrid cloud solutions that meet those needs that are defined in that new era is you've got to make it simple. And so that really is becoming the core mission of Hewlett Packard Enterprise, not just my group, but the whole company. We're looking at this saying, look, hybrid IT is where it's at. Digital disruption is driving a revolutionary change in hybrid IT, and we can capitalize on that. So let's get our software efforts that we have laser focused on making that a simple experience. Let's take the resources we have that are doing Helion and Cloud System and hyperconverged and our composable systems and all. Let's get them all aligned in the same direction. I believe that there's been certainly something you would notice, which is a revolution in your personal device at home, right? There were a whole bunch of, rewind 10 years ago, I'm of course, the system IT administrator for my home. So every laptop, every PC, anything happens. I'm sure most of you in this room are the same. Needs a firmware update, needs a this, needs a that. Dad, can you get in here and do this, right? And it might even be the printer needs paper. Dad, can you, anyway. So I go do all that. Well, it turns out, as everybody in my family got these, that job kind of went away from me. I don't really spend a lot of time. They update their own phones. It's easy to get on the wireless network at home, and as long as the wireless network doesn't crash, which is its own kind of issue, everybody's happy, and they honestly don't need me, and I'm pretty thrilled about that. That's a revolution in your home IT environment. That revolution hasn't happened in the data center yet, but it's coming. And we want to be part of driving that revolution and making it simple. And it's all centered around the apps and data generated both at the core and at the edge of these enterprises. And really, if you look at the core pieces of Hewlett Packard Enterprise going forward, software-defined IT, at the center of making that easy, that hybrid experience easy, and making it interoperate well with the edge. And that's our Aruba group that we have where we're treating that as an adjacency, an adjacent market where we can take compute technology that we have today. And we realize that all data doesn't want to get into a data center. Some of it needs processed right locally. Some of it's kind of redundant and not that important. If you look at a temperature sensor, honestly, most of the data you don't need. It's kind of the same most of the time, then it changes a little, then it changes a little. So really being able to do compute at the edge with these thousands of devices and transfer the appropriate data into your hybrid IT environment, that's a real opportunity for Hewlett Packard Enterprise, and that's where we're doubling down and investing going forward. So how do you do that? You need some sort, Henry had his architecture for the assembly line. What do we have for this innovation engine? What underlies this? What do we got to go build to get rid of that complicated diagram that I talked about before? And really, at the bottom, it's built on software-defined infrastructure. Our new category of software-defined infrastructure that we've created and defined for the industry that we'll talk about here in a minute is composable infrastructure. Infrastructure as code optimized for both traditional and cloud-native apps. So if you're trying to enable a transformation for your customers, you can't tell them, buy this box and this widget for if you're going to run traditional. Buy this one if you're going to run a VM farm. Buy this one if you're going to do containers and cloud-native apps, because that's where all the new applications are going. You can't do that. That won't work. That's not simple. That's getting back to the complicated diagram that I showed. You got to be able to provide one type of infrastructure that can flex to meet the needs of both the traditional type of workloads and the new style of workloads, and dynamically, because the amount of work going on between those is going to shift over time. You need to be future-proofed, and that's our composable infrastructure. But that's not enough. And as we were developing composable infrastructure, we knew, hey, what we're learning with our Helion cloud technologies and our cloud system, and even what we're doing in hyperconverged land, you need a certain amount of hybrid automation on top of that. If you're going to have composable infrastructure, somebody's got to do the composing, and that needs to be orchestrations type software. So we're continuing to evolve our Helion program, our cloud system program, our hyperconverged program to develop that software that allows simple orchestration. The unique thing about Hewlett Packard Enterprise, though, is we're not doing that in a way that says, as long as you buy all of my stack and my stack alone, your world will be simple. Because we know customers aren't like that. Some are going to be heavy VM shops, and they want that to be at the center. Some are going to be more aggressive down the new styles of things like containers, and they're not going to just want one container source. They're going to want Docker. They're going to want Mesosphere, those kinds of things. Some are going to want OpenStack, and so we're going to enable that. Our approach is really a flexible, partner-led, multi-IaaS, multi-cloud, which doesn't sound simple, but when we implement it, it is very simple. And you don't have to wait for that to come. You can already see elements of it today in our hyperconverged systems, in our composable systems, soon to be released at volume, and in our cloud system products that we have built around the Helion technology. So that's where we're going. That's how we plan to partner with our ecosystem, make it a open in the sense that we provide multiple choices, but not open in the sense that we're trying to support every possible combination under the sun. But for those combinations that we do support, make those as simple as possible because that's what the customers are demanding. And that's really what we're trying to do. Cloud made easier or hybrid IT made simple, like I talked about before. So let's kind of break that down and work through some of the different layers of infrastructure and how are we doing this? What steps are we taking? So I talked about at the bottom of that stack, composable infrastructure. And the way we talk about composable infrastructure is for a long time there's been traditional infrastructure. That's just you go buy compute, your servers, you go buy storage, you go buy your networking, then you buy whatever software you want to put on it. For a long time, it was dedicated application software. There are still specific cases like databases and in-memory computing where it's just an application running native on that set of hardware. Or people implemented what they called private cloud at that time. And most private cloud, if you ask really deeply into most of our enterprise customers today, if they say, yeah, we have a private cloud, what they really mean is they have a giant virtualization machine farm, right? That's not private cloud like the new disruption is going to demand from private cloud. Private cloud 2.0 looks a lot different than private cloud 1.0, which was a lot of virtualization. Private cloud 2.0 demands that you're able to support virtualization, bare metal, containers, all of those things, orchestrate across any of them and be able to flexibly associate services with those that your customers can consume, that app developers can develop apps on, and that your workload brokering software can deploy workloads to. So you'll see that more and more, and you'll hear us talk more about that. But traditional infrastructure, it's a good thing. We're the #1 traditional infrastructure provider for both cloud and non-cloud in the industry today, and you can bet we're going to continue to do a great job of that. But we also see where the market is going, and it's evolving. First step was converged infrastructure. So customers wanted simplicity. They got tired of building these private cloud 1.0, the VM farms themselves. And so they said, hey, could you integrate that for us? And so it's been about 8 years ago, we introduced this notion of converged infrastructure. There's been other players that jumped in there as well. You know some of those competitors. But it basically was, okay, take the compute, the fabric and the storage and lump all those together and put the virtualization on it and test it all together. It's still complicated, but we'll take the complication for you and we'll just deliver it to you and say you can buy it in a bite-sized chunk. This one does 10,000 virtual machines. On your mark, get set, go. Here you go. Don't ever change it. It's pretty fixed. It's pretty static. It does a really good job of those virtualization machines, but it's static kind of thing. And that's an important step, and we'll continue to sell those. Hyperconverged came on the scene, and it actually is a next step. It doesn't have the scale of the converged infrastructure capabilities, but the thing that it brought was simplicity, right? A simple user interface to be able to deploy those VMs just a few clicks. Our HC380, you'll see the example of it over here in the demo room. 5 clicks to deploy VMs. Anybody in this room can do it. We all do it. Our CEO does it in demos. We kind of show that you don't have to be a technologist-specific person or an IT support person to be able to use that set of infrastructure. It's all about simplicity. And there are other hyperconverged vendors that are even here at this show, and I think even Nutanix is speaking tomorrow. So hyperconverged is a movement, and what it's really about is it's about simplicity. It's about bite-sized chunks. but it's still very fixed. Even our HC380, you buy it to do virtualization machines at kind of a smaller scale, kind of SMB, Robo, that kind of thing. It's also, or it's fixed to do VDI. You know, it's a specific application. It's not dynamic. It's not flexing to the needs of a hybrid world. So that's why we went and did this composable infrastructure thing. And this thing has taken us years to develop. It's not a, hey, we got this idea a year ago and we decided we'd go kick this thing out. We've been working on it for over 5 years, the technology, the ideas, and the architecture. And what it is it's built around these 3 key capabilities: fluid pools of resources of compute, storage, and fabric. And when we say fluid, that means they can be dynamically allocated and assigned to a given workload. But that would be complicated for a customer to try to digest, so you need software-defined intelligence wrapped around those fluid pools to make it simple, to take care of all the work. And if you need to upgrade the firmware on the compute portion, is it compatible with the storage portion? This thing needs to just take care of that. It needs to look and say, look, as I upgrade this thing, here's a template that tells me what's compatible with what. You just like your phone. Hey, do you want to do the latest upgrade? Yes, okay. Wait around for a little bit, and here it is. Don't wait around very long, though, just like with your phone. So it's got to be able to do that. And then the final thing, and this is a really key thing, is you need a common API to access all these capabilities. And with one single line of code, you can do any of those operations, whether it's upgrade the firmware in the thing, or deploy the resources, or return resources back to the pool of composable infrastructure. So it's a whole new dynamic, flexible notion that allows customers to use it for traditional kind of things. You can run it as a VM farm if you wish, or you can deploy containers directly on it. You can deploy directly to bare metal with applications, and we make it simple, just like if you logged onto a public cloud and needed a set of infrastructure, doing IaaS in a simple way, infrastructure as a service. We built that into the platform, so you don't have to go buy it or add it or something like that. So what we found is when we first started talking about this, we had been working on it for 3 years. We were ready to talk about it a couple years ago. We started saying it, and some of the analysts are scratching their heads going, really? Can you do that? I mean, what is it? Now you can look at analysts pretty much aligned saying, this will be the next thing. This is kind of the next phase of infrastructure after hyperconverged. And what it really comes down to is the flexibility, the ability to adapt to these new workloads. So you can see some of the analyst quotes here. You know, first instantiation of a new class of infrastructure, compelling CapEx and OpEx. The reason it's got compelling CapEx and OpEx is because if you think about the way data centers are run today with those dedicated stacks of hardware, there's over-provisioning that happens. If this is my VM farm, I want to make sure that it has enough capacity, so I over-provision. Typical over-provisioning in customer data centers or IT shops is around 70% to make sure they can deal with peak workloads. Doesn't get rid of all over-provisioning. What it does is it pools the over-provisioning. So rather than this stack is over-provisioned at 70%, this stack of other stuff, my database kind of engine is over-provisioned in case I have a big database workload. You pool all that together and you share those resources across all of your data center applications, whether they be traditional or new style. So, you know, that's what that CapEx, OpEx kind of comment is about. You have to buy less over-provisioning, and then it's easier to run because you don't need as many people to deal with it. So if you look at analyst charts today, if you look at, and I didn't include that picture in here, sometimes we show it, you see Gartner kind of shows the evolution, and it basically now matches that stair-step thing I told, traditional, converged, hyper-converged, and composable. IDC does a different thing. It's called their adoptions curve. I know some of you have seen that, and it shows that same progression. So we're confident we nailed it. We know what the direction is, and we're the leader in establishing this category. So I told you kind of what it is and all of that. I thought I would show you a little bit of a demo of how it works, and I'll set this up by saying, you know, a typical application of a Synergy system would be kind of this hybrid IT environment where you've got a mobile backend, like a financial application. In a mobile backend, you use your phone to transfer money or whatever. There's a program on the other side, if you will, in the data center that kind of retrieves those instructions. You say, I want to move $500 from savings to checking. You go do that. Then there's a traditional database that's sitting there that has all the data, that's where your balances are and all of that. Those two need to interact. You could put one off in the public cloud, but the data for those two transactions is near each other, and there's security issues and compliance issues and transferring. Why don't you just have it on the same infrastructure and be able to do both? So Synergy can do that. So let's show that example, and actually, I think the guys are going to run that tape. So Synergy in that thing auto-discovers and assembles the resources necessary to run that mobile app, the mobile backend. And it presents a catalog of workload templates that says, okay, that thing runs in Docker, it's an open source application, so I just grab Docker and the right amount of compute and storage to be able to run that specific application. I run it. When I'm done with it, those resources get returned back to the pool. It's not like, oh, that's your dedicated stack of infrastructure that only does that. They're returned to the pool. Now it's time for our SQL database. Oh, by the way, all that returning is done through one single API command that you saw there. Now we put SQL Server. Typically, people run those databases on bare metal. So SQL Server, combine that with some of our 3-par storage that's in the box. Scale it. This was set up for high availability. The system monitors to make sure you're getting that highly available, high bandwidth situation. And what's cool about it is it's not just in one frame. This whole Synergy thing, the putting resources back into the pool, scales across an entire rack of systems. So you can imagine sharing these resources across a row of these systems. We can support up to 20 of those systems in the first instantiation, and we'll be expanding that over time. So you can see this really changes the game in terms of software-defined infrastructure capability that's out there. And I really encourage you to go check out, we've got Synergy on the floor here. Synergy is the name of the system that does composable infrastructure for us. I really encourage you to go check it out. But, you know, where are we at in that whole development process, et cetera? Well, we've got almost 100 customers, early access customers that are using it, testing it, figuring out how they're going to use it in their environment, and those have been going extremely well. It's something we're really having a good time with, and we're ramping our factories for volume shipments of that platform here at the end of the calendar year. So really excited about this. Expect a lot more action coming up here in the near term. But I thought I would show you at least one of those customers. We have videos on 3 of them. Not everybody wants to tell their competition that they're going to take care of, or that they're going to compete with them with new technology, so they're pretty quiet about the fact that they're testing Synergy. But some of them are willing to talk, and one of them is Hudson Alpha. So let's roll that video and see how they plan to use it.
With HPE Synergy, we're able to bring all of the needs of those 34 companies, those 200 researchers together and use the resources in the most efficient manner possible. All of us are data intensive, generating over a petabyte of data a month. We need to be able to integrate it in real time and ask questions in real time. And I believe the HPE platform is going to allow us to do that.
So Jim here at Hudson Alpha, they're doing genome mapping to fight critical, difficult diseases, rare diseases. And that's extremely noble work. It's a nonprofit institute. It's got a bunch of partners in there. The cool thing about how it uses the Synergy system is that if you look at genome mapping, it actually displays properties of different types of infrastructure problems as you go through it. There's certainly a big data component where you're crunching lots of data, but there's also stuff that looks like a database. And there's stuff that looks like analytics piled onto that database, as things that would look in memory for some of those technologies. And so they see this as a way, a breakthrough technology, and a lot of their new development on this processing is happening in containers. So you have these databases with containers and all of that. This infrastructure allows them to cover that space with one simple approach. So again, back to making this whole hybrid IT notion extremely simple. So we're really happy to have Jim and them on board. So that's, you know, you'll see more about Synergy. You can go check it out, and certainly there are some sessions talking more about composable infrastructure and where we're going with that. But at the beginning I mentioned that's just the bottom. There's kind of that layer above. If you're going to make something composable, what does the composing? How do you orchestrate? What are the pieces there? And we have those technologies as well, and we're bringing those closer together with our Synergy development, our hyperconverged development, our cloud system development in my group, as I mentioned earlier. But here's one example of a customer, Trust Power, that's in New Zealand. And really, they transformed 176 legacy applications. They were setting up a transfer to a new data center, and they decided, hey, while we're doing that, why don't we transform and make it a hybrid IT environment so that we're set up for the future? So they did exactly that, and they were able to save a whole bunch of money, bring up resources to bring new products to market more quickly, fostered innovation. Now, so what did they use? What do they have from us? They have our OneView technology. I didn't mention the magic sauce, that software-defined intelligence in a synergy system is actually the same magic sauce that we'll put on Blade system, which is what they're using here with 3PAR storage. They've got our OneView technology. They've got Hewlett Cloud Suite technology in there, so the same thing that we're building this next generation hybrid IT stack around our Hewlett capabilities. And then they've got Blade system with 3PAR storage. So they're even taking advantage of some of that new simple hybrid IT experience with some of the software that we have today, and they're certainly excited about the roadmap that we're going to deliver as we go forward with Trust Power. So this isn't the end, meaning the end of that journey. I talked about a few of these phases, and what's interesting is we had originally announced this as kind of our journey on composable infrastructure, and since then we've realized, look, customers don't care only about the software-defined infrastructure. They want to know the evolution of that stack. We looked back and said, look, the vision we announced still basically applies. So software automation was really about doing that software-defined intelligence, the OneView capability, and getting that ecosystem open to a set of partners that aren't just traditional partners, they're new type of partners as well. So, you know, Docker, Ansible, Chef, Puppet, SaltStack, I mean, I can't list them all here, as well as the traditional partners, our VMwares and our Microsofts and those players, all have written to this composable ecosystem. That was phase one, and we had that done over a couple years ago. Phase two is about delivering composable infrastructure, and I just mentioned how we're ramping factories at volume with our synergy systems, but we're not done with composable infrastructure when we do that. We plan to expand that family beyond the box that you'll see in the showroom to more flexible components, and we will even evolve our hyperconverged solutions to be composable with the right software on them to be able to flex those resources. So composable, phase two, we're getting into that phase. The next phase of this journey is really about multi-cloud continuous service delivery. So we can do private clouds today, built on our cloud system technology, built on our Hewlett OpenStack technology, all of that integrated together. But it's still a bit of a project, right? We come and help, we have services, we do a deal with customers and say, look, we'll come in and implement that private cloud. But that's not where we want to go. That's where we're focused now. Most of my team is spending their days on phase three. The part that's not spending their days on phase three is really working on phase four. And most of you in this audience, I heard when Dan asked that question, knew about the machine technology because Martin Fink came one year and talked about it, I think at kind of a high level of, hey, we're doing this cool stuff around photonics, memristor, all that. The next year he came back and said, hey, we bundled all this together, we're doing a new computer architecture, and we're going to call it the machine. And so this audience was one of the first audiences to hear that pitch. But if you think about everything I've been talking about, making things simple and making things composable, taking fluid pools of resources, and then you think about the technologies you learned about from Martin on the machine. So what are those technologies? Well, photonics. If I today can compose resources across those racks that I showed across the screen, what if through photonics, which gives me a lot better latency and bandwidth, I could compose those resources across the entire data center? Or maybe if I could compose those resources outside of a data center all together on the same problem and be able to flexibly apply those to a given workload as I need to apply them. That would be really powerful. That's what the guys are working on. So that's just the photonics side. Now let's think a little bit about that persistent memory. In the current synergy system, we can flexibly apply different amounts of compute, storage, and fabric to a given workload. But we can't flex memory. Memory is kind of tied to the compute node. If you think about the machine, it's a memory-centric architecture. The memory is divisible. The memory is persistent. We can flexibly assign that persistent memory to a given workload, which will reduce over-provisioning of memory, just like we did in the other category. So looking forward, those machine technologies, and in fact, the Synergy platform that you'll see in there, you can look inside the system at some very specific areas, and you'll see these spots where we have pre-plumbed for photonics inside that box. So watch for these technologies to start creeping into our given platforms, including the Synergy platform. And in fact, we've even announced that we're going to be showing some demos of machine as a unit in the not too distant future as well. So watch this space. A lot of work going on with my team and with the teams around that on the machine. And I wanted to wrap with, some of you've seen this, I think, on TV, but I think it's a really cool thing. The machine and those technologies combined with making hybrid IT simple really will change this industry. And at some point, we'll all look back and go, well, duh, of course it did. I think this commercial actually really captures that quite well. Let's roll that.
At the beginning of the 21st century, the Earth needed to find a new way to keep up with the data from over 30 billion connected devices.
Just 30 billion.
So, a bold group of researchers and computer scientists in Silicon Valley had a breakthrough they called
The machine.
The machine. It changed the basic architecture of computing, putting a massive pool of memory at the center of everything. And by doing so, it changed the world. It's been a part of every new technology for the last 250 years.
Everything?
Everything.
So you can tell from that, we're pretty bold about the future. Hewlett Packard Enterprise typically hasn't done big flashy advertisements about stuff that we're working on for the future. We've done it for products that we're shipping today. So we're pretty bold, we're pretty excited. We think we have a laser focus on the value that we can add for customers and partners alike, and it's really around these core notions of simplicity, flexibility of the architecture, and really revolutionizing, industrializing that whole digital transformation or disruption that you guys are seeing in the industry today. So I really appreciate the time with you. I hope you enjoyed it, and be sure to catch the character breakfast at some opportunity. It's highly worth it. I highly recommend it, and thank you very much.